My name is Evelyn Namara. I'm from Uganda. I'm an ISOC ambassador, and I'll be taking the notes.
We have a few people who've joined us. I'm going to give you all a chance to move to the table over here, but we're going to move ahead with the program, and we'll come back and ask you to introduce yourself later. So I want to say a few words about what brought us together here for this workshop by starting out and telling you how fantastic it is that you're here with us. And I'd like to call your attention to a fact you've already observed, and it's sort of a joke, but I'm going to tell it. I was just at the UN for the stakeholder consultation on WSIS Plus 10 recently. And the panel was moderated by Doreen Bogdan, a very senior officer woman from the ITU. And the four women experts who were speaking were all women. And Doreen made the introduction and said, and as you may have noticed, all of the panelists, who are all expert in their field, happen to be women. And I said, yeah, we're making up for lost time. Come on, you're supposed to laugh.
We're nodding our heads in agreement.
So the way we're going to run our next 90 minutes together is going to be with that spirit of looking at things. Even if we're looking at tough things, we're going to look at them positively and productively and think about what we can do to continue to affect change. So what I want to do right now is just start with a few facts. And what we did in putting this workshop together, and I was not involved in putting the workshop together, I'm very pleased to have been drawn in to help co-moderate. Natalie and a colleague proposed a workshop that was about measuring gender participation in the IGF itself. And totally unrelated, WAVE, this group that I'm on the board of, I was not involved at the time, wasn't on the board, proposed a workshop on measuring gender participation at the national and regional IGFs. And the MAG that I am on proposed that these two workshops be merged. So that is how we've come together. We're going to be looking at the entirety of the Internet Governance Forum ecosystem, which today includes, of course, the IGF that you're at, which is the global IGF that is affiliated with the UN, and then the organically developed IGFs that have grown up around the world. And I'm going to cheat by handing out a document that has a map on the second page, which will show you. There are now 13 national and regional IGFs. They are regional and sub-regional IGFs. In Africa, there are several, 5 to 6 to 8 countries that make up a sub-region. In Europe also has a sub-regional IGF. Then there are over 30 national IGFs, and there are 4 youth IGFs. All that are very dynamic and have grown up in a self-generated manner. So we're going to look at what the gender participation has been, and we're going to start out by looking at, I come from the private sector, and I used to be the Vice President of Internet and E-commerce for AT&T Computer Systems. And I learned a long time ago that facts are our friends, because if we can't count and we can't measure, we can't tell what progress we're making.
I'm Brazilian, I'm in computer engineering, and I have 30 years old. When I was at university studying computer engineering, there was only 2 women, me and another colleague in the class. The class had 40 students. 38 are male. I always think why it is happening, why women are not interested in computer engineering and technology. When I become more involved with internet governance environment, I see a similar scenario, and I think about it. Where are the women in the internet governance? Why they don't appear? And because of that, I intend to propose this workshop, to let voice for strong women inspire the new generations of women to get involved with internet issues and engineering as well. So I will pass to Mary Lee Cade to get the floor and present some data about the women participation in the national and regional IGFs to begin this discussion.
So one of the other hats that I wear as a MAG member is I act as the coordinator of the national and regional IGFs to plan what we call the substantive session, a dialogue between the national and regional IGFs. And this year we undertook a survey of certain characteristics. And I was already going to do this, but I was especially motivated when I looked at some of the workshop topics to be sure that we looked at gender. So we're going to look at a subpart very, very quickly of the results of the survey. So we have, I mentioned the number, but let me say it again. We have 13 regional and sub-regional IGFs and 30 national IGFs, plus the 4 youth. The 4 youth IGFs did not respond to the survey. It was voluntary on who responded. 25 of the total number of our initiatives responded. And I'm just showing you, first of all, we have a requirement to be a national. Sorry, they're not required to track. They're not required to track. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to figure out where I am here. They're not required to track women in the organizational structure. I can't read that part. Women in the organizational structure, nor youth, nor persons with disability. But we asked the question in the survey, do you track that? And the interesting thing, so there's the organizing of the event, and then there's who attends the event, right? So this is the leadership structure. Hi, Anja, welcome. This is the leadership structure of the National and Regional IGF survey. And 65% of them say they have women in the organizational structure, meaning in the leadership structure, and 52% have youth in the organizational structure. Only 17% identify that they have a person with disabilities in the leadership structure. Remember, again, this is voluntary tracking on this part. So the next chart that you're looking at tells you what the participation was, not the organizing, but the participation. And 74% tracked the stakeholder group participation, while 26% do not, of the actual participation. 65% track gender and youth, 35% do not, and 39% do identify persons with disabilities in their attendance. So I thought that was really interesting that even though it's not mandated, we are beginning to track the the gender attendance. However, I want to share a problem we encountered. We're not counting consistently or the same thing. As an illustration, I will share with you that one of the regional IGFs reported that yes, they track gender, and then they showed me the chart. They have 535 attendees, 37% are female, 50-some% are male, and 9% are doctors. So apparently we have a new gender being introduced. I love to know that these folks are doctors, but I'd like to know how many were men and how many were women. So I give that to you as an illustration that as we talk about gender participation and both leadership and in participation, we have to be sure that we're asking the same question and we're all counting in the same way. And if we say what we want is gender parity, a growth in gender participation and balance, then we really have to think about how we're going to gather those statistics. I think we should maybe stop and start with some of our comments from our panelists. And I want to welcome Anja and just ask you briefly, would you just introduce who you are to folks?
Thank you. I'm very sorry for being late. I was on the main session on net neutrality, which was supposed to finish at 4, but ran a little over. My name is Anya Kovac. I work with the Internet Democracy Project in India. We work to support an internet for free speech, democracy, and social justice. And some of our work looks specifically at gender issues as well, though not everything. Thank you.
I'm going to start with Jane because she has a limited time with us, and I want to introduce Jane. I've asked people to speak from, in some cases, the speakers are going to speak from a personal perspective. And I'm going to throw out some questions to them as we go along. The questions are not mandatory, but some of the speakers have a prepared comments they want to make. Now, the interesting thing is this section is not about all of the issues related to gender participation. It is really about measurement. And so we won't get to all of the topics that some of you are particularly interested in, but when we get to the open mic, we'd like to hear about the other issues that you're most concerned and interested in so we can reflect that back. But I want to ask Jane. Jane has had a very interesting experience and career, which I've tracked very closely, and I'm going to ask her to tell you a little bit about it and about her views about gender engagement, participation, and change in some aspects of that. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'll be brief because I'm running off to another meeting, and hopefully it'll set the stage for some of the discussion. I used to work in a landlocked country in the former Soviet republics, and we were helping build regulatory strengthening and an institution there, and of course communications infrastructures. I made the mistake of, I learned later that I made the mistake of suggesting that a very capable economist, a woman, I didn't think of her as anything other than an economist, but it happened to be a female person, go on a trip to the U.S. to learn about what was going on in other regulatory bodies and how they were structured and to get more experience. I was told by her that I should not support her because other people, some of the men in the regulatory body, which was very closely balanced as far as the participation of female-male in that body, wouldn't want her to go because they wanted to go on the trip. So it's not that I'm trying to single out men and women, but obviously we're here to talk about gender, but I was very surprised by this because in that country, which is a former communist country, there was a very strong balance of women engineers and women working in that space. So I was surprised that this woman I'd known who'd been a great participant in the work we were doing was asking me not to help her get more capacity and more training because she would be singled out and actually probably punished internally. Not hurt, but it would be impacted. The last thing I'll say before I leave is that I work for the Internet Society. We're trying to do more to create opportunities for engagement for all people, and including, of course, increasing participation for women in different fora. And the way we do that is trying to, we bring our organization to the ground through our regional teams and also through our regional chapters. Those chapters are mechanisms and ways that people can participate and help motivate the gender issue should they want to. So that's something that at the very grassroots level you can do on your own with our chapters. Our chapters are open to anyone. Also with our regional teams, we're very open to suggestions from people as we help support national and regional IGFs. We've been trying to create a stronger platform across the world for the IGF spirit and the different work that goes on by supporting those organizations, both financially and substantively with our experts. Some other quick examples, we help support a group called AF-Chicks in Africa. This was a grassroots group that was created by women engineers, many of whom were from countries that were from a religious affiliation. They were uncomfortable being just in rooms with men getting training. So they self-organized and created a women's engineering group. That's specific to that region and specific to that group, but that's something we do. And so if there's a self-formulation in another region for a specific purpose, we are happy to help try and support those groups. We also help support something called Grace Hopper, and I think our colleague from IEEE can speak more about that, which supports women engineers and women technical experts in different fora. I'm not the best person to speak about that, but the other thing is the fellowships that we do give and ambassadors. We often will send out emails to our chapters and people who are part of ISOC, you can join free, to let you know that we have different opportunities, and there are technical opportunities for the Internet Engineering Task Force. There are policy opportunities at the IETF for government officials and other interested parties, and also to events like this. So we do provide different scholarships because we know that access is very important, and it's personal access to an event to meet other people so you can multiply the networks of humans. Okay, I'm going to run off.
Onto that for a second.
Absolutely.
And
There's
you're
gonna be a
piloting with
pile-on.
IEEE,
We
a
are
fellows
piloting.
program to specifically move folks into the technical communities that are developing ICT industry standards. We have people at 802 developing all the wireless communication, finding out how that operates this week.
So
Perfect.
one of the things, Jane, thank you, and thank you for coming and changing your schedule so you could be with us. One of the things that we will do for all of you is ask you if you're interested in hearing further from some of the speakers. If you will give, if I may do this, make this offer, if you would give a business card or contact to Natalie, we'll make sure that we share that information with the speakers who are here, because I think you may hear about resources that may sound interesting that you may want to follow up with. I'm going to turn to some of the other speakers, and the first, let me first of all just offer the opportunity to the speakers to take a couple of minutes or 3 minutes and make a statement similar to what Jane did if there's a particular direction that you want to go to. And I don't know, Daphne, if you want to kick that off?
Well, it's interesting to start also with the statistics, because in the Women's Rights Program we started in 2012 as part of the Gender Dynamic Coalition within IGF, what we call the Gender Report Card. And we ask every organizer of a panel to fill in this gender report card and tell us about the gender balance in each of the workshops and sessions that are taking place during IGF. So it's all the results are published in the Gender Dynamic Coalition site within the IGF site. But I think it's interesting to start to look at what's been happening during all these years, and we also decided to have a gender report card this year for the regional IGFs. So we did it in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And we find some interesting trends, and I could say that we looked at the number of male moderators and female moderators of panels, the number of panelists also, and the workshops most where we have more women panelists or more women moderators, and which are the interests, we would say the expertise of women, who are invited to be in charge of those panels. So just small numbers, but just to start our discussion. Last year, out of 89 workshops, 67 of them were moderated by men, and the rest by women, and then 60% of the panelists in all these workshops were male. So we see that there is a strong presence of men as those who have the opinion, those who have the expertise, those who can lead. But then it's interesting also to see that on the sub-theme of internet and human rights, there's almost a parity of women and men panelists. So, I would say that there perhaps is where the issues that include women more in the discussion are targeted, and discussed. So, and then also following that, we also have the workshops that have to do with emerging internet as an engine for growth and development, and enhancing digital trust. Last year, this thing was the most followed by all attendants to the IGF. And we could see that there was also quite a balance between male panelists and women panelists there. Now, the sub-theme that has less women is emerging issues. We would say that panelists there were a ratio of 4 male to 1 female panelists. No? So, but that gives us also an idea of where we are and where are women getting involved and from where. No? So I think it's very interesting that we start analyzing that and looking at, perhaps we don't have so many women engineers, but for instance, many sociologists, many lawyers, who are coming into the internet rights field and doing the contribution there. So I think it's very interesting to look at these figures and be able to analyze them. I can talk afterwards of the regional IGFs, or you want me to talk now?
No, why don't you go ahead and do the regional standards?
Yes. So in the regional IGFs, it was the first time we did it, and it was interesting that we wanted to know about the extent of women's participation here, and we were able to collect information from 42 sessions in all these three regions, and with an average of 300 attendance to each session or workshop. And so we see also that women in these three IGFs were less than half of the participants in general. We have those figures. But then we see also that women are not invited as moderators. Almost all men in the three regions were the moderators, and no place for women there. But they were invited, yes, to as panelists, no? But in a smaller proportion. I would say that we didn't have the ratio that we had at a global level. So we see that still there's a lot to do at regional levels, no? And especially to get women there, and then to have to work towards having more equity in the participation in the different panels. But still, we can say that gender issues were mentioned by participants and panelists in some of the sessions. And in Latin America, out of 8 sessions that we had, because we only had plenary sessions, we didn't go to workshops, in 4 of them, the issues came up. And it was interesting because in APC Women's Rights Program decided to have internet governance workshops before the regional IGFs for women specifically, so that we could discuss the big issues with our perspective and see what were the problems there. And those women were invited to stay for the IGFs. So I think that made a difference in a way, in comparing to 2 years before, because women were now informed and they had been discussing the issues before, and they were able to participate from the floor, and speak up and tell everybody what they were thinking about the issue being discussed. So we even had a woman who, she was very proud of her indigenous language, and so she decided to speak in her own language, and I make a question in her own language, in a way that's saying, okay, you have everything in Spanish here in Latin America, no? And what about my own mother tongue, no? Where is what I can find there on my own language? So, but still, we see that there's a lot to do at the regional level, and that's why we think that it's very important perhaps to go on having these pre-meetings with women so that they can engage more actively in the discussions. Thank you.
Great data. Thank you, Daphne, from this speaking. And now I
Turn to Anja.
Anja.
Could I ask Daphne a question first? It's a clarification question.
It's always the speaker's prerogative.
Because what I'm wondering is if you found that there were almost no women moderators at the regional level, but at the global level it was okay. I'm just wondering, does that mean that the women who are part of panels or moderate panels, at least at the global level, overwhelmingly come from the parts of the world that you did not survey, which is WEOC, Western Europe, the developed countries. Do you have any data on that? Or?
No, but we were thinking of starting to have that sort of also look at it, at the numbers, no? Because where do these women come from? The ones who are invited as moderators or as panelists, no, in the global IGFs. But for instance, in Latin America, as women, we were quite, we were not comfortable seeing only men moderating the panels. And the fact is that women do participate in the organization of the whole thing, no? And in Latin America, what they have is an open consultation to everybody who wants to participate in it regarding the themes that are going to be discussed during the regional IGF. And lots of women participate there, so it's really hard to see that you are not there just because of perhaps some bias or whatever, or some power thing. And so I believe that we still have to be able to talk about it with our male colleagues, no, and say, okay, what's going on, and let's go for equity or parity here too.
Thank you. I don't have quite as concrete data or figures to share. It's more based on personal experience. Many years ago, I was part of the executive committee of a European students' organization that was a union of national unions of students in Europe. And in that organization, gender as a concern was something that was really central to how it was organized. And very often in internet governance, I've thought that actually we need similar work to bring this to the fore much more centrally. The first thing I had to think when Daphne was talking was I live in India now and have been part of several Asia-Pacific IGFs. And from the very beginning, not just actually as part of the IGF, but even some of the civil society email lists, the tone in internet governance was very different from anything else I had been used to. It was just the culture is set in a particular way, and the way people spoke to each other in the beginning, I thought that it was enormously rude. It was really something to get used to and to understand that this is a culture, there are codes, you don't necessarily have to take offense so easily, etc. I didn't find it appealing though, and I must admit when people start to speak like that, I still don't find it appealing. That hasn't really changed. Specifically about the Asia-Pacific IGF, I also realized that there was a specific discourse because the people who first started it were mostly part of the technical community. That's nothing good or bad. It's just that because it's a fairly small, very committed group of volunteers who spend an awful lot of time, they are doing their thing in their way. And for quite a few years, I think it didn't open up enough. It's not as if there wasn't any goodwill, but there really, to some extent, was this cultural barrier. And I think the Internet Governance Institute on Gender that APC did definitely helped. But also, we asked quite a lot of people from the technical community to attend RightsCon, which was an internet conference, and this year organized by Access Now, which was in Manila this year, and which is more the playground of civil society, so to say. So it's our culture that governs there. And I think that was a really interesting, for them as well, a really interesting encounter. And getting greater participation from civil society in the APR IGF was part of the agenda at RightsCon. And I do think many people now are commenting that the Asia-Pacific IGF is changing, but it really took those conscious efforts of people who wanted to collaborate, but felt that need to be done in a more, that some issues needed to be addressed more directly, heads-on, so to say. A few other things that I just had to think of. It's also about the agenda setting and what we discuss at the IGF. I find that very often the more gender issues are either in separate workshops or not there at all. And what a colleague and me did this year, Bishaka Datta, we organized a workshop on the issue of consent. And we're both part of a feminist organization. Consent for us is at the heart of almost all the work that we do, because it is so central to feminist thinking and practice. But what we did in that workshop was basically bring the concept of consent as it relates to sexual expression all the way making links to the importance of consent when it comes to the social contract between citizens and the state in the digital age, and asking questions about, have we really given our consent to the social contract the way it is now? What I thought was really interesting was by using a concept like that, we really had a cross-pollination of views and perspectives and people, where there were very strong feminist voices in the room. There were very strong data protection voices in the room, including from government agencies that did data protection. And I don't think they had had that kind of discussion on consent before. So we ended up covering technology, ethics, morality, law, a whole range of issues. I think that's also really important. It is not just about adding women on, right? It's also about shifting those debates and thinking about what are the ways in which we can do that. And finally, well, two more points. One quickly, something I learned from my years in that student organization was that if you really look for them, you always find good women. But the system in that organization was such that if you did not fill the quota with women, you couldn't move forward. And there were women who weren't at all appreciative of the way gender was pushed in that organization until they found out 3 years later that the reason they were given the chance to lead that particular workshop or do this particular thing that got them elected to the post they wanted was because we really had to look for another woman. When you look for them, you find them. There's plenty of us. And finally, I did ask that question already about diversity. This is something I'm concerned about still in the global IGF. I appreciate that there are many initiatives to bring women from the global south to the IGF. APC does important work, Diplo, ISOC, but I think it would be really valuable if there would be a central pot that is governed in a transparent and open way by the IGF, maybe the MAG, the Secretariat itself, so that people can come independently and you do not need to have already access to a particular network, which also means that you need to have a particular allegiance. I think if we really want to open this up, we need something like that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Anja, for your comments. Now I will pass the floor to Silene.
Thank you, Anja. Very impressive. Well, for me, it's a little bit complex. I come from political theory, and I tend to make more complex my reasoning. Briefly, I came into the tech field starting in government. I worked in the regulator before working in Alcatel, and then I started working in Cisco 13 years ago. I could say that the tech field is not easy for women, and it isn't easy for social scientists either. So for those that are in the social sciences, get ready. For those young people, for those young ladies, get ready for that. So anyway, I think that we are doing good things in IGF. Women are doing very well. Mary and Kay and all of us, well, I'm new at this. All of women in tech are doing very well. We are transcending, as the existentialist said. We are elaborating, we are doing things in the world. We are transforming, and that is a very good thing. I'm still concerned, very concerned. There is some confrontation, and it's natural among women and men. Men still want their absolute. They want to be still in what they have been for always. They want to be essential. They don't want to be threatened, but I think they have to be accustomed that we can do things, we can elaborate as much as they can, and that we are their peers. And I think that we have to be more human, all. We, as women, have to be a little bit less prudent. We have to be less coward. We have to go for it. And we have to understand them. We have to understand men, that they fear that they do not understand us. And they have to understand us, that we do not remain at home, that we want to have our liberty and go for it. So I think that we need to cooperate, as well as nation needs to cooperate as well. So we need more diplomacy, and we need more humanity. And frankly speaking, I think IGF is doing a very good job. Anything that we can do, anything like quotas in forums, I don't really go for quotas, but if we can go for quotas, let's go for quotas. We don't go for any volunteering system, we go for whatever we can do. What can we do? So this is all what I can say. History will tell if conflicts will reduce. There is nothing biological, nothing physiological among women and men not to be the same thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Silene. Now I will pass the voice to Mary.
I think I'm going to follow Jane's example. I'm going to start with a story, and maybe I'll end with a story. I once went to a training class. You know, they're trying to teach you. They're giving you techniques and leadership tools and all of this. And of course, they love to do these exercises and games. So we had a game, and the game was they split us into teams, and we're in a plane, and it was in Alaska in the United States. The plane went down. It's the tundra. It's cold. You're frozen. You can only take certain number of things from the plane, and you have to get from where you crashed to this place. What do you take? How do you go? We're in teams. And one team is all men. Oh yeah, we're gonna make it. We're gonna get there. We're gonna achieve. Guess who died first? I'm from the IEEE. So when we approach internet governance, and our first tactic towards it has been really to look at that internet aspect, that engineering part of what we're all examining here, those technical roles that we play. And when you look at the role of women in engineering, it is challenging. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. If you look at your statistics out there today, you're going to see that the amount of women going into the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, are decreasing. And this is despite consistent and concerted efforts, true pushes to bring more women in. That's a challenge. I would actually wonder, as a statistic for IGF, to look at where are the women coming from? Are they coming from the poli-sci field? Are they coming from the policy-making field? Are they coming from regulatory, from government, or are they coming from technology? Where are they? Where's that balance out? That's a point to look at. Now, within the IEEE, we've actually created a program. We call it Women in Engineering. It's one of our societies. It has 15,000 members right now. That sounds fantastic, doesn't it? There are 430,000 members in the IEEE. Think about that. Now, not every woman joins. Not every woman chooses to take advantage of that. That is, of course, her prerogative. However, the number is low. And it does make you wonder, where are they? And then you go out and you look at it. It's not just getting a woman into the field, but it's also keeping her in the field. This is an enormous challenge in technology. Many women enter this field, start working, and are so intimidated, put off, annoyed, frustrated, or a combination of all of them, that they give up the field. So we are approaching this in a number of ways at the IEEE. We've built this community to engage the women. We are reaching out. We are having conferences and sessions that are meant to drive this subject and to be driven by women, to encourage them, and to build that sense of sisterhood. Because what the studies are showing are, if you make a woman feel like she is there as part of the norm and not the exception, then she will continue her participation, she will continue her involvement, and she will indeed grow as a leader. And that is a very important thing to achieve. So we started programs also for youth. There's that old expression of the Jesuits of give us the boy until he is 7 and we will have him for life. Well, give us the girl until we get her a degree and we'll probably have her for life too. And so what we want to do is to try to build that diversity in the women, to have them engaged. So we have training for them. We have something called the STAR program to encourage young technologists. We have tryengineering.org, which lets them learn even before they get to university. Is this something for me? What do I like? What don't I like? How can I engage? Because their mission is to facilitate the global inspiration, engagement of advancement of women in technical disciplines. And there's a word there that is magical to me. And that word is inspiration. Because it is not enough to engage a woman. It is not enough potentially to advance a woman, but how do you inspire her? Because if you build the fire in a woman and build that sense of belonging, of engagement, of attachment, she will become something utterly marvelous. Because that potential lies there. So we have that mission, we take it, we do it. There are magazines, conferences, there are challenges for women and contests and awards for them to get them to move forward. So we are, believe it or not, the largest international professional organization dedicated to promoting women engineering and scientists. We can actually say that. So while in some ways those statistics are rather scary, on the other side they're rather encouraging. There is that potential. There is that hope. There is that growth. I'm going to pull back for my other thought when I go to my story because I think it might lead us to a little bit of our discussion. I was once at an event years ago that shall remain nameless for reasons that you are about to see. And they were tracking, of course, their female versus male attendees. And they were saying how wonderful it was that they had so many female attendees. Well, yours truly was in the room and I was going, hello? I'm feeling rather lonely here. Where are these? Where are these women? You ever been at a big conference where they have a huge display for, and they hire a lot of young ladies that wear very, very short dresses and very, very high heels to try to get the men to come into the booths? They were counting them. So the point I want to drive to with that is yes, numbers are very important to track. But it is what you do with the numbers and it is how you interpret those numbers and parlay those numbers that are extremely valuable. And the concept of gathering the leadership roles for the women are extremely important. And I think that direction for IGF is crucial. The moderators, the panelists, the suggesters, the drivers is extremely important to pursue. And that need to push it down becomes paramount to have. Because if a woman is simply there to bring your numbers up, you may discourage her. You need to make her feel that she is not a statistical balance, but rather a necessity. And so finding ways to engage women and to bring that perspective in is absolutely valuable to do, and to do it in a way that is encouraging and supportive. How many of you heard that story about the actress Jennifer Lawrence recently? Anybody hear this story? Okay. Jennifer Lawrence, right? Might have seen her in a movie, maybe. Big star, brings in millions of dollars to the movie. You're getting the image, right? Has said how challenging it is for her to be in sessions because when she talks strongly and forcefully, she is seen as being aggressive, as being pushy, as being confrontational. But if men are in the room and talk the same way, they are considered to be forceful and strong and an advocate. So what you want to do is make it not just that you have women at the table, and not just that you have women treated as leaders, but that you have the ability for women to put forward their opinions comfortably, strongly, forcefully, and not be considered aggressive, negative, and confrontational. And I certainly hope I haven't been the latter in what I've expressed to you right now.
So let's move to another part of our discussion. But before we do that, I think it's worth our just noting something that Anja and I are aware of, and I think Marion Gordon and some others here are, but it is not as visible as it needs to be, and that is that recently at the United Nations, a significant commitment has taken place in the Sustainable Development Goals with the establishment of a goal, Goal 5, that is focused on gender equality and inclusiveness. And, you know, we are just at the beginning of understanding how the Sustainable Development Goals will begin to be rolled out and recognized both in the intergovernmental organizations like UNESCO, the ITU, UNDP, but also at the national level, where governments are asked in their national broadband plans and in other plans that they make and share to incorporate how they're going and describe how they are going to contribute to achieving
participation in public life, or seemingly no interest in participation outside of their home at all. So I think we have to be kind of clear. I take your point that it works differently for different cultures, but I think for women who already come to these events or have already expressed an interest, I'm not so sure it's all that different, because exactly like you're saying, it's not even in Europe or the US, it's not as if like women's empowerment has reached its end, right? And if I look at India, despite its horrible track record on gender issues, one of the most powerful women who've inspired me most and taught me the most about how you deal with power structures also come from there. So it is a more mixed message, and I think we should think more about who is it exactly we're talking to then.
So we're here with a fairly narrow mandate on this particular workshop, but I think that we will be capturing some of the topics that are coming up, and certainly I was not able to attend the Dynamic Coalition on Gender, but it is a place that's doing a great deal of work, and maybe I'll come back to you, Daphne, a little bit later to say something about that. But I want to go back to the purpose of this workshop, because I'd like to think about whether we are making, we don't make recommendations at the IGF, but we certainly can have good ideas that we can promote and put forward. And yesterday in the substantive discussion of the dialogue with the national and regional IGFs, we talked about, as I said to you all when we opened, in order to be listed as a national or regional IGF, the report that is provided, it's a mandatory report, they must track stakeholder participation. They're not today required to track gender. But one of the things that came out of the discussion of the workshop yesterday was the idea that gender tracking ought to be added, and we're talking about both tracking of male-female participation in the organizational structures and also in the participation. And reporting, not commenting, not judging, reporting. Reflecting the fact that there are facts that can be useful. One of the things that was particularly interesting to me is that one of the newest national IGFs, Zimbabwe, requires 50-50% male-female on their leadership structure. It is mandated, and there's a couple of others who do it as well. So so here's my question. What you're thinking about goals in the number of participants, the number of participants in, or gender diversity in panels. What are your thoughts about the idea of goals? Mandates being it's prescribed and you got to have 50-50. I'm talking about goals. What are your feelings about goals in improving the gender balance? And I'm going to go to the audience first and then to the panelists. So anybody have a view? Olga, yes.
Thank you, Marilyn. One goal would be to have balance in the panels, and I've been saying this several times. One goal would be to have balance in the leadership positions of I-STAR organizations, which are relevant in this space. It takes like 2 minutes if you review the board composition of all the I-STARs, RARs. Some have 0 women, and I'm sure that you would agree with me that there are many well-prepared women that can. I'm an engineer, there are other engineers and other careers among us that we could perfectly be suitable for those positions. So that goal would be, and I would like to take what Selena said about quotas. I think that we could ask them to have some gender balance quotas in their board. Not only 2 or 3 women, as you said, just we bring the gender balance as one woman as a picture there, but have some desired balance. It's starting with the quotas. Some of these organizations have 0 women, 0, ever 0 women in their boards, and they are very relevant, especially, for example, for Latin America.
Yes, please. And I, before you speak, I should disclose that I'm a member of Internet NZ.
Oh, thank you. So we organise the national IGF for New Zealand. It's called NetHui, and we have, for a couple of years now, had a policy of 50-50 women on our panels. This year, all of our keynote speakers were women. We facilitators, because not all of our sessions are panel-based, we try and keep them, but that's also, we coordinate communities and make sure that they try and work together. Certainly, one of the other things we've done, which I believe in a lot, because we're a civil society organisation, but we're a technical community charity, so we have quite a few of opinionated grey-haired men, is we instituted this year a really strong code of conduct. And we had people in every session making sure that it was a safe, respectful conversation. And if we had, and I was one of these people, so if you had 2 or 3 men starting to have a back and forth conversation, we just jumped in as mic runners and stopped them getting the microphone and made sure that the next person who wanted to speak was a woman. It's small, simple stuff, but it kind of helped.
I think a nice goal to have for the common IGF in Mexico, if the mandate is renewed, is to have gender balance in attendees, panelists, and all activities, basically, and also to make a very strong invitation to our colleagues all over the world to have women coming from developing countries, indigenous background, and to really invite them to be part of this conversation.
Thank you very much. Marilyn, as you know, and many others may know it, this is new to me. I'm not new to public forums, but so what will come out of this? Can we note that there seems to be a strong consensus for gender balance, that different examples were given around the world as to how that could be achieved, that we think that numbers are, as you put it, are our friends. If we need to bear witness, the numbers can help us to do that, but to just send the signal that change is in the air, and coming, as I do from the Americas region, I very much welcome the comments just now from Mexico.
So one of the, let me respond to Marion, and we'll come to you. When the Dynamic Coalition on Gender and with APC's leadership did their first report card, it really was done as a facts are our friend approach. It was, if you don't know the facts, you can't argue the case kind of thing, right? And as I constantly say, perceptions matter. But if you don't know the facts, you can't argue the case. When they published the report card, the information was there and it was presented in a workshop, but it wasn't on the website. And today it's on the website. And so now we have much more visibility about the facts, and the updated version that they've done and the survey that we did and will polish and publish on the national and regional IGFs. And Daphne, I'll be back in touch with you because maybe we can share some data. We'll be publishing that, and that is going to be distributed as an example of the success story of the national and regional IGFs. So we're going to be making it public. Also in the, there is a session on Friday where it's kind of an open mic session where people can identify emerging issues, and it's certainly possible that we could, someone could go to the microphone and say, this was a topic of discussion, and so you're not making a recommendation, you're sharing an observation, you're raising awareness. But I think what you can assume, because of Goal 5, and because we are a project of the UN Secretary General, certainly there is going to be an ongoing awareness about gender balance, and I think I'm going to be very optimistic and say that I am going to see all of you in Mexico next year at the IGF, since I am confident that we're coming to Mexico, that having a visible objective of increasing the participation of women, it can be done without any mandate. It can be agreed to voluntarily. So let me come to...
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Liza Garcia from the Philippines. And I'm from civil society. And one of our objectives is to come up with our own national IGF. Hopefully by next year. We have been actually preparing for it. Our organization has started already doing initiatives for that. And what we have done is actually to have consultations in the different regions. We just came up with a Philippine Declaration on Internet rights and principles that we want. And we did a crowdsourcing of that, as well as consulted in the different regions in the country. And one of the principles actually centered on gender equality. Now, of course, we would want to, we will try to have a balance. As always, in most of the workshops, the conferences that we organize, we always try to achieve gender balance. But sometimes that is not possible because some women would not attend. And in this IGF that we are planning locally, of course, we would need for women to understand the relevance of these spaces for them so that they would come. Actually, this December, we're planning to have a national consultation on gender and ICT that would focus on women's use and access of the internet. And we're hoping that it would help so that women would understand the process and so that they would also engage in these different spaces. And we would also want to include other sectors that are often not included, especially in the digital world, like the inclusion of women with disabilities and indigenous peoples as well, whose voices often are not heard in these spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I was actually in the Philippines at the CSTD Intersessional there, and I am looking forward to the opportunity to maybe come to your national IGF. Daphne, I wanted to give you the microphone for a few minutes, and then we're going to get ready to do a wrap-up. But you've done a huge amount of work in this, and I thought it would be, if you don't mind speaking just a little bit more for the benefit of others who are here about the Dynamic Coalition and the work there.
Well, just a little anecdote. Yesterday I participated in a panel where we were about 8 women, and we were talking, only women, and the discussion was about tech-related violence against women and freedom of expression. And you know, this thing that feminists want to censor the internet and all that thing. It was a very interesting panel, and people from different regions there and so on. But when we finished, in the audience, about 30% men were there, and one of them came up to us and said, "But why was it that there was no man in your panel?" Eh? So interesting, because of course we think that men have a lot to say also about the issue, no? So in a way, you know, little light, and perhaps you're doing the same. But, and today in the Gender Dynamic Coalition session, we had about 30% men also present there. And the interesting thing is that most of them were young men. So, as you say, academics perhaps coming, or students, or also people from the technical world, but young people. So perhaps it's, you know, it's in the younger generation that we have this interest in participating in this type of discussions. So I think that's something to look forward to there, no?
WAVE was founded by a man who is from the Arab states and who believes very strongly that men must support the gender balance and equality if we are to solve the problems of the world, which I think is quite interesting. So it is not an effort to exclude the other 50% when we are trying to include this 50%. I want to try to wrap up a little bit. I had asked us to think about, you know, do we think there should be a goal of gender equality? And in fact, in some ways that question has already been answered for us by the establishment of Goal 5 in the Sustainable Development Goals, because at least at the UN level, and this was signed off on and agreed to at the Sustainable Development Goals Summit in New York, which means that the world's governments have come together and said that they embrace that these 17 goals, some of which are about climate change, but others are about ending poverty and food certainty, economic improvements, that these 17 goals are what the governments of the world and the citizens of the world should work together to achieve by 2030. So it is, I think, something to ask ourselves, and that is, we do need, I would say, we do need to continue counting and to make the counting visible, to publish the facts. People can be informed by information, and that can help them to adjust or change their attitude, or even just to engage in a more informed discussion. I think we're going to see that continuation of publishing of the facts continue, and I would ask you all to think about your own views about, as we go forward, you know, do you have ideas about how that information can be used to better inform planning? One comment that was made on you before you got here, Jane told an anecdote about a country she lived in and worked in, where she was helping a young professional woman to qualify for an international training course. And the young woman asked her not to continue to advocate on her behalf, because there are very limited opportunities to seek out that international training. She worked in the employment numbers were 50-50, but the management numbers, that is, those were in management, were largely male. And the perception was that there weren't enough opportunities. So the young woman was going to almost be criticized for pursuing the economic opportunity. I think we may today, that was about 10 years ago when that happened, I'm familiar with that situation. I think today perhaps we're in a slightly different situation where through the opportunity of the internet, the online world, the introduction of ICTs, and the growth of new kinds of opportunities, perhaps we are in a world where the pie is big enough for everyone to be able to have a piece of it, if we're able to sort of advance the idea that by coexisting and collaborating and making opportunities for all, that we're actually going to benefit our world, our children, our societies, and our economies. And that, I think, is the real reason why we want to count and we want to increase the number of women who are participating and are moving through the various levels of engagement and also able to participate as leaders both in planning and then in presenting at the national, regional, and global IGFs. I want to turn to my co-moderator, the person who is really the brains behind putting this session together, and ask you to make any closing comments.
Our time is over. To close the session, I want to thank you, Evelyn, for her holy rapporteur in the session. And thanks the panelists for the amazing analysis and comments, and all the audience with this rich discussion here. Thank you, all of you.
And if some of you are particularly interested in engaging with the panelists and follow-up, be happy to have you give your business cards to Natalie, and she will share your contact details with the panelists for follow-up. Thank you, and thank you in particular to the panelists who came and joined us with short notice.